References for credits and criteria related to training can be found here. One thing you need to know before we go much farther is the policy on records presented for credit. At a minimum, complete training records show the class title, number of hours or start and stop times, names of those in attendance, and the date on which the training was conducted. For crediting drills, it's also essential that the training record contain the location of the training and any creditable props that were used. With all training, a brief description of the class contents would help. You will receive 100% credit for properly documented training. If records are incomplete, PIAL will award credit for the training, but will deduct 25% due to there being incomplete records. If no records of claimed training are available, PIAL will not award any credit for that training. When preparing for our field visit, you may submit printed records or electronic records on a CD or thumb drive. The most accurate way for PIAL to assign training credits is by having a listing of all training completed by individual members. But we will accept whatever documentation that you have to offer, including class rosters. Credit for training is divided into 8 areas. These are the same 8 areas the previous schedule used to award credit for training. But the newest edition of the Fire Suppression Rating Schedule introduced significant changes to some of these areas. The percentages shown to the right of each category are the percent of the overall 9 points available for training that can be earned in each category. Just glancing at these, you can easily see that the credit for drills gets you the biggest bang for your buck. Let's take a closer look now at each of these areas and see how credits can be earned. The first category of training is probably the most changed area, and that is credit for drills. In fact, the new schedule doesn't even refer to this training as drills, but for the sake of continuity and simplicity, I will. The new schedule calls this area training facilities and use. That's because there are two things that determine credit earned in this area: the availability of training facilities and your use of those facilities. Both ISO and PIAL have long-standing policies that any facilities that you have must be used in order to earn credit. After all, what good are they if they are not used? The overall credit you earn for drills is derived from multiplying the availability factor by the use factor. Again, this category is worth more than any other area, and because PIAL looks at each individual firefighter's training, the amount you earn will be somewhere between 0 and 35 points. While drills done by members of multiple departments are creditable training, they cannot be transferred to the graded area as drills. Let's look now at how the facilities availability and facilities use factors are derived. An NFPA compliant training center can have a myriad of props used for training firefighters, but there are only two that the Fire Suppression Rating Schedule recognizes as creditable for structural fire suppression training, and those are the live fire training structure, including a smoke room, and a drill tower that's at least 3 stories in height, excluding the roof. When these props are located on a training center that's at least 2 acres in size, the full 35 points for the facilities availability factor are earned. These credits are not proratable, meaning that if a drill tower is less than 3 stories tall, or if a training center is less than 2 acres, they are not creditable at all. But there's good news. These training props don't have to be permanent structures. NFPA compliant mobile props are equally creditable. Finally, because the maximum credit for drills is 35%, the value of the training facility's availability factor will never exceed 35 points. Then there's the facilities use factor. Remember that PIL will not award credit for facilities that are not used. So to get credit for your facilities and your props, you must use them. To be creditable, each of the 2 props at the training facility must be used by at least one member of your department at least once during the graded year. The value of the prop is not prorated in any way. But because the credit for drills comes from multiplying the availability factor by the use factor, Full credit can only be earned if all firefighters complete at least 18 hours of training at the training facility. Please note that this is a decrease from 24 hours per member per year required for full credit under the previous schedule. When all firefighters receive 18 hours of training per year at the training facility, the facility's use factor is 1.0, and when multiplied by the 35 points for facilities availability, the full 35 points is earned. But what about the credit you previously earned by having a complete training library, audio-visual equipment, and pump and hydrant cutaways? Are those credits still available? The answer is maybe. Because the FSRS limits the availability factor to 35, the 4 points available for these items are not available to you when you have or have used a fully creditable facility. However, should your training facility not earn the full 35 points, we will recognize these items as bonus credit to raise your facility's availability factor. Consider on this slide that the training facility did not have a 3-story drill tower. Its training availability factor would have been 25 without the tower, but since they had all of the bonus items, the facility's availability factor is raised to 29. Unfortunately, if there is not a training facility in use, you cannot get credit for the bonus items. Let's look now at company training. Representing 25% of your overall training credit, company training gives you your second biggest bang for your buck. This training is defined as fire suppression related training done within a company unit at that company's fire station or using streets, buildings, and open areas. Company training can also be completed through computer-based instruction and self-study, but these are not often seen. In addition, PIL will roll excess drill hours into company training or other categories of training when appropriate. The portion of the 25 points possible is derived by dividing the total number of training hours by the maximum possible training hours, then multiplying that value by 25. In the previous schedule, firefighters were required to complete 20 hours per member per month, and in the new schedule, they are only required to complete 16 hours per member per month to get full credit. One often misunderstood area of this training involves firefighters who are members of multiple fire departments. PIL views suppression-related training as valuable training, regardless of where it is conducted. Therefore, members of multiple departments can obtain a record of their training conducted in the other department and transfer it to the department being graded. Because this training was not done using equipment and fellow company members in the graded area, the value of this training is reduced by PIL by 50%. Finally, in some cases, one department member may complete many hours above that required for full credit, while others may complete very few training hours. Unfortunately, training hours for each member is capped at 192 hours per member per year, and excess training cannot be transferred to other firefighters. Officer training is an area that's changed significantly in the new schedule. In addition to the 12 hours of continuing education in leadership-related topics, there's a new consideration regarding officer certifications. In addition, overall credit for training has been reduced from 15 to 12% of your overall credit for training. The new schedule divides this 12% into 6% for training and 6% for certification. To calculate the credit for training, PIL divides the total number of training hours completed by the number of officers times 12, and then multiplies this result by 6. For instance, if you have 3 officers who have each completed 5 hours of leadership-related training, the department would earn 15 divided by 36, or 41.67% of the available credit. This relates to 2.50 points credit for officer training, shown here in the formulas as T3OE. To calculate credit for officer certification, PIL recognizes any officer who has earned an IFSAC, Pro Board, or other certification at the Officer 1 level or above as a certified officer. Note on this slide that I mentioned that the minimum creditable certification is Fire Officer 1 or equivalent. I'd like to briefly explain how an equivalent certification may be recognized. When the Louisiana addendum to the fire suppression rating schedule was being developed, it was mentioned that many of the larger fire departments had members on the fire line who did not have the many prerequisite certifications and were too far along in their careers to get them. Unfortunately, without the prerequisite certifications, they could not be awarded an IFSAC Fire Officer 1 certification. Most of these officers rose through the ranks at a time when some of these certifications were not even available to them. In addition, the larger departments had in-house officer training programs that met NFPA training targets for award of these certifications. Finally, some of these members had been fighting fires for 25 to 30 or even more years, with many of those years spent in company officer, district or battalion chief, or other incident command positions, and they were highly qualified for their certification. After consultation and discussion, PIAL agreed that if the authority having jurisdiction over the fire department would sign a letter certifying that these officers meet or exceed all knowledge, skills, and abilities required of an Officer 1 certification, then PIAL would recognize these members as certified officers. Because we will not treat any graded area differently than any other graded area, this option for equivalent certification is available to all fire departments in Louisiana. But I would advise you to give serious thought prior to making this claim of certification. When the fire chief certification letter is submitted as part of a fire insurance rating package, it falls under the affidavit the chief signs stating information submitted is true and correct, and there is legal peril in submitting false information. The credit calculation for officer certifications is straightforward, with the number of certified officers being divided by the total number of officers, with the result multiplied by the 6 points possible. The credit is shown on this slide as T30C. To arrive at the total credit for officer training and certification, the credit for training is added to the credit for certifications. Finally, unlike company training, officer training and certifications earned in other departments where the officer is also a member is 100% transferable to the department being graded. Credit for new driver operator training represents 5% of your overall training credit. This represents a 3% increase over the credit that was available under the previous schedule. But with the increased credit came an increase in the number of new driver training hours required for full credit. Previously, 40 hours were needed, and now 60 hours are needed. This training is very specific and must be conducted strictly for new drivers. If your new drivers are training alongside your existing drivers, it is not creditable as new driver training. New driver training can be earned outside the graded area's fire department and is 100% transferable to the graded area. Finally, what if you didn't have any new drivers to train during your graded year? Simply show your PIAL field representative your new driver operator training program outline and explain when and how it was last used and how many hours it entails. To calculate the credit, the sum of all new driver training hours is divided by the number of new drivers times 60. That figure is then multiplied by 5. When program credit is awarded, all 5 points are earned. The only change to the existing driver operator training category is the amount of credit that's possible. In the past, this area represented 2% of your training credit, while under the new schedule it now represents 5%. Because this training should be done using the graded areas apparatus, any driver operator training obtained by members of other departments in those other departments is not transferable to the graded area. Credit for hazardous materials training represents only 1% of your overall training credit, but the number of hours required to earn full credit has increased from 3 to 6 hours per member per year. This training should focus on identification and recognition of hazardous materials encountered in structural firefighting operations, but other hazmat training can be considered on a case-by-case basis. Finally, because this training is universal, Any training obtained in other fire departments is fully transferable to the graded area. There have been no changes to credits available for recruit training with implementation of the new schedule. Representing 5% of your overall training credit, recruit training should be dedicated to recruits and done within the first year of membership. When recruits are trained alongside other department members, the credit is not awarded as recruit training. Instead, it is credited in other applicable categories of training. The final area of training is that related to building familiarization for pre-incident planning. To earn full credit in this area, you must have pre-plans for 100% of the buildings that the PIAL field representative will ask you about. In addition, there must be documentation of when the buildings were re-inspected. Maximum credit is earned when the frequency of inspection is 1 year or less. Finally, these plans should be available to responding incident commanders either en route to or upon arrival at the fire scene. PIAL will award up to 3 points of bonus credits to recognize firefighters who have earned national certifications in selected categories. This credit is earned when members holding certifications complete at least 45 hours of company training conducted by the graded area fire department within the graded year. The formula for calculating total credit for training is shown here. Basically, the sum of credits earned in all individual training categories is divided by 100, then that value is multiplied by 9. Finally, the credit for certifications is added. Please be aware that even though up to 3 bonus points can be earned for certifications, under no circumstances can the overall credit for training exceed the 9 allowable points. This concludes my presentation related to credit for training. As always, we at the Property Insurance Association hope this information has been useful to you. If you should have any questions about this presentation or other rating-related topics, please do not hesitate to call. In closing, I'd like to thank you again for your time and attention, and I hope you have a great day.